The last road into Dulwich was a winding cut of cracked asphalt flanked by brittle pine. I remember how the trees leaned in as if whispering something they didn't want me to hear until it was too late. The moving truck struggled up the final hill, tires slipping against loose gravel, and then the forest broke, revealing the town like something forgotten and folded into the hills. Dulwich wasn't on most maps anymore. I only found it through an obscure listing for the rental property Quiet Mountain Home. 1 bedroom, winterized, no pets, that was it. But the pictures showed a small cottage with a slate roof and a wood-burning stove tucked between skeletal oaks. I had just left a job I hated, and a city that hated me right back. The idea of disappearing for a while was appealing. I pulled into town in the fading gold of late October. The streets were lined with faded salt boxes and square little stores that looked closed even when they weren't. The air had that first cold snap bite to it, sharp enough to sting the lungs. I parked behind the moving truck and stepped out into the silence. A hand-painted sign greeted me at the town limits. It had once read, "Welcome to Dulwich, Est, 1821." But the top had been scratched out and rewritten in thick, fading red. "Do not welcome the first snow." I stared at it for a long time. Something about the lettering bothered me. Not the message itself, but the fact that it looked refreshed, as though someone had repainted it recently. The warning was fresh even if the town wasn't. I didn't ask anyone about it that first day. Just got the keys from the rental office, a converted postmaster's building, and drove straight to the house. It sat at the edge of a small ridge facing the tree line, with no neighbors in sight. The porch creaked when I stepped onto it. There were iron hooks on the front of the door frame like something had once been hung there, maybe a bell, maybe something heavier. The landlord hadn't met me in person, but they'd left a welcome note on the kitchen counter. Just a generic "enjoy your stay" in looping handwriting, followed by a list of emergency numbers with several names crossed out. I unpacked the essentials that night. No cell signal, no cable. The house came with a box TV and a wall-mounted radio that picked up only one local station playing soft fiddle tunes and occasional warnings about moose in the pass. The walls groaned with the wind and the pipes gurgled like something was living just out of reach. It wasn't creepy exactly, just old. The kind of old that settles into your bones if you let it. The next day I went into town to look around and buy supplies. People were polite but stiff. They nodded when I said hello, but no one asked where I was from or why I'd come. The woman at the general store, probably in her 60s, rang up my groceries without a word until I asked her about winter tires. She paused, hands on the scanner. "You'll want change," she said. "Gets that bad?" "It's not the snow," she muttered, then caught herself and smiled too quickly. "Just best to stay indoors once it starts. You're up at the Larson house, right?" "Is that what it's called?" "Used to be. Folks remember the family. It's a good place. Just don't go out after dark if the snow's new." That was the second time someone mentioned the snow like it had a reputation. Later that afternoon, I went to fill out paperwork at the Dulwich Library, where I'd picked up part-time work cataloging old town records and maintaining the local archives. It was small, just 2 floors, plus a cramped back room that smelled like pine cleaner and yellowing newsprint. That's where I met Claire. She looked to be around my age, maybe a little younger. Red flannel, corded headphones around her neck, sleeves rolled up to the elbows like she was always in the middle of something. She barely glanced up when I walked in. "You must be Jack," she said, brushing her bangs out of her face with a pencil tucked behind her ear. "I'm Claire. Sorry it's a mess. We're doing inventory. No worries, I like a little mess." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Don't say that too loud, this place listens." I laughed awkwardly, but she didn't. We worked in silence for a while after she gave me the rundown. Logging donation cards, moving dusty boxes of newspaper reels, labeling shelves that no one had touched in decades. The heater clanked on overhead like it resented being woken, and the windows had that double-glazed haze you only get in places where winter overstays its welcome. I don't remember how it came up. Maybe I mentioned the road sign, but Claire stiffened. "You saw the warning?" "Yeah." Thought it was just a weird tradition. It's not. She didn't elaborate, just looked down and made a mark on her clipboard. That night, I lay in bed and listened to the wind roll across the ridgeline. It had that hollow edge, like it was scraping across something it shouldn't. The trees moved differently here, stiffer, slower, like they weren't reacting to the wind but swaying on their own rhythm. I chalked it up to mountain, nerves, new town, new job, new house. Everything always felt a little off when you first changed your life, like your brain hadn't caught up with your body. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about that sign. Do not welcome the first snow. What did it mean, not welcome it? Was it a warning? A tradition? A leftover from some strange local festival? And why did the general store woman know where I lived without asking? I spent the next few days trying to settle in, chopping wood, cataloging back issues of the Dulwich Register, avoiding asking too many questions. It wasn't just the weather that kept people quiet. It was something else, something unspoken and heavy. They watched the clouds too closely. Kids walked home from school faster than normal. The church always had fresh candles burning, even when it was empty. On the 5th night, I found something buried under a drawer in the kitchen. It was a piece of cardboard, damp and half-rotted, jammed behind a warped cabinet panel. I had to use a butter knife to pry it out. The ink had mostly run, but I could make out 3 words written in bold, uneven marker. Do not answer. Nothing else, no signature, no context. I held it under the kitchen light, turning it over and over in my hands, waiting for something to click, but all I felt was cold. The next morning I woke early. The sky was the color of a bruise, and the clouds had rolled in low and heavy. I stepped outside with my coffee and saw the treetops stirring like something big had passed through. There was a stillness that felt artificial, like the world had been paused just long enough to catch me looking. It was the first time I felt watched, not from the trees, from above, from the clouds, from something waiting just out of sight. I threw some extra logs into the shed and checked the locks on the doors and windows. Everything felt colder than it should have been, like the house had exhaled overnight and let the mountain in. That afternoon at the library, Claire handed me a stack of books and said, "Storm's coming. How bad?" She glanced out the window, eyes narrowing. "Not bad, just early." She hesitated, then added, "If you hear knocking, wait, don't open. Even if it sounds like someone you know, why would anyone knock in a storm?" She didn't answer. That night I sat by the fire with all the lights on and tried to read, but I couldn't concentrate. The shadows from the flames kept shifting too fast, like the logs were burning in a rhythm I didn't recognize. I kept checking the windows, half expecting to see something. The clouds broke around midnight. The snow hadn't started yet, but the wind was different, heavier, colder, like it had a weight behind it now. And I knew, somehow instinctively, that whatever Dulwich was afraid of, it was close. The next day at the library, Claire handed me a stack of donation books and told me to check the bindings for water damage. Her tone was normal, but her eyes kept flicking toward the window. The clouds had deepened overnight, flattening the light in the room until everything looked pale and two-dimensional. I asked if storms like this were common for October. She didn't answer at first, just tapped a pencil against the desk. Finally she said, "It's not a storm." "What do you mean?" She looked up, weighing her words like she was debating whether to say anything at all. "Sometimes it falls before it's supposed to, like a mistake." "The snow?" Claire nodded. "It always starts small, just a dusting, barely anything, and then the prints show up." I almost asked her what kind of prints, but something in the way her voice dropped told me not to. I shelved the books and kept glancing at the window. Nothing had started falling yet, but the wind had picked up again, rattling the windows with a steady persistence, like it was testing their strength. When I looked at Claire, she was watching me. "Don't answer the door if the snow is new," she said suddenly, like a line she'd memorized. "Even if someone knocks." She didn't blink. "Especially if someone knocks." That night, I couldn't stop hearing it. Not knocking exactly, but sounds that were close. branches scraping the roof, the faint pop of wood expanding in the cold. Once I swore I heard footsteps on the porch, but when I checked, there was nothing there. Just wind sweeping dead leaves in circles across the boards. I moved the couch against the front door, just in case. The next morning, the ground outside was damp, but no snow. Still, the air felt wrong, like everything was bracing. At the store, the cashier, different woman this time, wrinkled her nose at me when I walked in. "You're the one staying up at Larson Ridge?" Yeah, she didn't say anything else, just bagged my food too fast and gave me the wrong change. People watched me in that quiet way that tells you they're trying not to look. When I got back to the house, there was a piece of folded paper under the front doormat. It hadn't been there when I left. I opened it right there on the porch. Don't let it in, no name, no explanation. I didn't sleep much that night. I stayed up with the radio on low and the fire stoked high. Around 2 a.m., I started hearing a soft clicking from inside the walls, like something tapping just behind the plaster. I followed it to the far corner of the bedroom, but there was nothing, just old cracked paint and a draft that hadn't been there before. The next day at the library, I asked Claire outright, "What's going on in this town?" She gave me a long, flat look. "You saw the sign." I did, but it doesn't mean anything unless someone explains it. Claire didn't speak for a while. Then she motioned for me to follow her to the back office where the town archives were kept. The room smelled like mildew and dry paper, and the overhead light buzzed faintly. She pulled a thick file box down from a shelf and set it on the table. "Don't take any of this out of here." Inside were old handwritten letters, newspaper clippings, and a bundle of photographs bound with string. Most of the photos were of snowy streets, empty, desolate. In some of them, you could barely make out bare footprints in the drifts, always going one direction, always ending at a house. "They call it the white calling," Claire said. "Some folks think it's a curse. Others think it's a mistake, like something got trapped here that shouldn't be." She handed me one of the letters. It was from a woman named Eleanor Cribbins, dated 1986. Most of it was rambling, talk of her son going out in the snow and never coming back. The last line stuck with me. "They only knock once, the rest is waiting." "People disappear?" I asked, voice low. Claire nodded. "Always one, every year, always after the first snowfall. That's why no one welcomes it. That's why the sign's there. But why not stop it? Move, tell the police. Something. We can't leave after the first snow," she said. "That's when you're marked." My skin crawled. "What does that mean?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she pointed to one of the photos. It was an old one, yellowed at the edges. A man stood on a porch looking at something just out of frame. His face was slack, unreadable, but there were footprints in the snow below him, perfectly bare, perfectly straight, leading to his front step. None away. "He opened the door," she said. "They say he was smiling when they found the house empty. Who found it? No one, just the prints." After that, the house was sold to someone from out of town. I felt the blood drain from my face. "It was the Larson house," she added quietly. "We didn't talk much after that." That evening, I stood on the porch for a long time watching the sky. Clouds churned overhead like boiling water, and the air smelled like metal. Snow hadn't started yet, but the trees were shaking harder now, tossing their last dry leaves into the air like warnings. I thought about leaving, driving back down the mountain and pretending I'd never seen that sign, never heard Claire's voice go flat with memory. But a part of me already knew it was too late. I'd seen too much, asked too many questions, and I'd already been noticed. The next morning, a single flake landed on the window pane, then another. By mid-morning, the trees were coated and the porch was white. Snow. I didn't move for a long time, just sat at the kitchen table staring out at the trail that curved through the trees beyond the ridge. The stillness was absolute. The kind of silence that doesn't just press against your ears but fills them, blocks everything else out. Then I saw them, footprints, bare, leading up the path toward the house. I couldn't breathe. I opened the door a crack, not all the way, and leaned out to look. The prints were perfect, heel to toe, like someone had been walking slowly and deliberately. The spacing was even, the depth too uniform. But there was something worse. There were no prints behind them, none at all. It was as if they'd started midair. I shut the door fast and bolted it, pushed the couch back into place and dragged the kitchen table against the frame. My heart was pounding so loud I could feel it in my throat. I grabbed the fire poker and walked through every room in the house. No broken windows, no signs of forced entry. But the air felt different, thicker, like someone had exhaled into it. I checked the attic hatch, still sealed. I checked the basement door, locked from the inside. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was no longer alone. When I returned to the front door, the snow had already started covering the prints, but not fully. They stayed outlined in the powder, like the ground was remembering where something had been. I didn't leave the house that night. I didn't turn off the lights. The fire burned until long past midnight, and every time a log popped or shifted, I flinched. I couldn't see anything, but the pressure of being watched was unbearable. It was like something just outside the range of vision was leaning in, waiting. At one point, the front porch creaked, just once. I didn't go to the door. I didn't move. I barely breathed. And when the noise stopped, I waited another hour just to be sure. I slept sitting up in the living room chair with the poker across my lap. At some point, I must have dozed off, because the next thing I remember was the gray morning light and a dead silence. No creaks, no wind, no sound of birds even. I looked at the floor by the window. There was a melted patch near the sill, not large, but shaped like a foot. I stood in the middle of the kitchen staring at that patch of melted floor. A faint print, no bigger than my own foot, but smoother, almost too smooth. No texture, no toe definition. Just a general shape pressed into the boards like someone had stood there dripping long enough for the heat to soak in. The fire had gone out. I hadn't noticed. I was too tired, too strung out on nerves to realize it had burned to coals hours ago. My back ached from sleeping upright. My hands trembled as I stirred the ashes and added more wood. The flame sparked weakly, like it was reluctant to come back. When I turned around, I couldn't stop looking at the melted patch. It was already drying. If I blinked, it would disappear, and maybe I could pretend it had never been there. But I couldn't convince myself. I knew what I'd seen. I knew it hadn't been there the night before. And I knew, without question, that I hadn't been alone in the house. I skipped the library that day. I didn't call Claire. I didn't feel like facing anyone. I just wandered the property, circling the house over and over again, scanning the snow for prints. There were some animal tracks, probably from a fox or something, and a few patches where heavy snow had fallen from the roof, but no bare prints, none like the ones I'd seen before. I went around back and checked the basement access. The door was shut tight. I tried it anyway, found it locked from my side, and triple-checked it before retreating back indoors. I was halfway through microwaving a cup of coffee when I noticed the mud. Not a lot, just a faint streak on the inside of the back door, like someone had pressed their hand against it while wet. The weird part was the angle. The smear was low, but the shape suggested a palm. No fingers, just a rounded palm print, wide and blunt. I wiped it away, then immediately wished I hadn't. That night, I wedged a kitchen chair beneath the door handle and stacked pots and pans on the hallway floor. Trip alarms, the kind of thing I hadn't done since I was a kid home alone during storms. My house wasn't haunted then either. I told myself this one wasn't, but I didn't believe it. The lights flickered once, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. I piled more wood into the fireplace, pulled the curtains tight, and sat in the same chair as the night before, staring at the door. Snow was falling again. I could hear it, soft and slow, like fingers brushing velvet. It didn't sound like normal snow. There was no wind with it, just the sound of soft impact, a hush that blanketed everything too cleanly. It was well after midnight when I heard the knock. One, Single heavy knock, then silence. My chest seized, my breath caught and refused to release. I didn't move, not an inch. The knock hadn't come from the front door. It had come from the wall, from the side of the house, the wall nearest to the bedroom. My legs moved before I could stop them. I crept toward the hallway, heart pounding so hard it drowned out everything else. I peeked around the corner. Nothing. The hallway was empty. The pots I'd stacked were still in place, but the air was colder. The kind of cold that feels heavy, internal, like something breathing on you from beneath the skin. I returned to the chair and didn't sleep. The next morning I checked every inch of the house. No new prints, no broken windows, no unlocked doors, and yet the sense of intrusion lingered. I felt it in the walls. I heard it in the old beams, how they popped like footsteps when they warmed. There were more of those creaks now, louder and slower, as though something paced just above me, or below. When I finally returned to the library, Claire looked at me like she already knew. "You didn't come in yesterday," she said. "There was something outside my house." She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Or inside?" I didn't answer. Claire pulled me into the archive room again, closed the door behind us. She was jittery, biting the inside of her lip as she pulled another box down from the shelf. This one was newer, the label handwritten in red ink, Larson Files, 2002 to 2005. "You're not the first one to hear things," she said, "and you won't be the last." She handed me a folder. Inside was a copy of a missing persons report. Caleb Larson, age 12, disappeared during the first snow of 2004. No witnesses, no signs of struggle. House locked from the inside. "He was my brother," Claire said. I looked up sharply. "Your last name isn't—" "I changed it." After, she pointed to a second file. "That's my mom. She went missing the year after." Same pattern. My stomach turned. "You live there?" She nodded. "We were the last family before the place was sold to out-of-towners. Then again. No one stays long. You said one person disappears each year. Sometimes it skips, if it's not welcomed. But if someone sees the first flake, really sees it, it chooses. That's what we believe. And the footprints?" She looked at the floor, voice lower. "They always come first, always bare, never in pairs, never with any to leave." I told her about the print in my house. The one that melted into the floor, the knock against the wall, the low smear on the door. Claire didn't blink. "They're getting closer." I didn't ask what they were. The word carried too much weight. I walked home through heavy snow. The flakes came straight down, with no wind to carry them. It felt manufactured, like the sky was only putting on a show for Dulridge. A personal blizzard, tailor-made. By the time I reached the front porch, my boots were soaked through. But there was something worse waiting for me. Prints. Bare, human-shaped, leading from the edge of the woods, up the hill, across the porch, and directly to my door. No prints leaving. The same pattern, the same impossibility. I locked the door slowly and stood in the entryway. Nothing looked disturbed, but I didn't take off my boots. I didn't put my bag down. I walked straight to the bedroom and threw open the closet, checked under the bed, ran my hand along the baseboards. Nothing. I checked the attic hatch, still closed, but I could smell it now, something earthy, damp, like mulch left too long in the rain. I followed the scent to the corner of the hallway where the walls formed a dead end. At first, I saw nothing, but when I leaned close, I spotted something behind the baseboard, wedged deep into the crack, a scrap of fabric, wool, red, moldy. I pulled it free, but the smell got stronger. My eyes watered. I dropped it into the sink and turned on the garbage disposal. It clogged instantly. Something hard hit the blades. I turned it off, reached in, and pulled out a handful of splintered wood and bark. Not from anything at my house. Not from anything I could identify. I didn't sleep that night either. Instead, I sat in the kitchen with the lights on, every window covered, every door locked. But I couldn't shake the image of the prints outside, how they started with no beginning, how they ended at my door, how each one looked the same, uniform depth, Equal spacing, no variation. Not like walking, more like pressing, more like being placed there. Around 3 a.m. I dozed off in the chair again. When I woke up, I couldn't move. Not fully paralyzed, but heavy, sluggish, like gravity had doubled in the room. I opened my eyes slowly and saw them, footprints, inside, bare, circling the bed, one full loop, then stopping. No prints leading out, no sound, no motion, just the trail, still wet. I stumbled back so fast I hit the dresser. My legs finally caught up with me, and I slammed the bedroom door behind me, heart hammering in my chest. That smell was back, stronger than ever. Rotting wood and frostbitten dirt. I didn't open the door again until sunlight came through the curtain. The footprints were gone, but the wet marks remained. I didn't go into the library the next day. I didn't want to walk through the snow knowing the house had been entered while I slept. I stayed inside, kept the fire going, and tried to pretend I was just tired. That it had all been a trick of light and fear and an old house shifting in the cold. But when the sun began to lower and that same smell crept in again, I knew I had to talk to Claire. I called her. No answer. I called again and again until I gave up and pulled on my coat. It was almost dark by the time I reached town, the snow crunching underfoot like it had something hidden beneath it. Every step I took felt heavier, as if the ground wanted to remember me. The library was already closed, but I saw a dim light coming from inside. I pounded on the door until Claire opened it, eyes wide with something between worry and frustration. I didn't want to come in, I said, but it happened again. She didn't ask what I meant. She just locked the door behind me and pulled the curtains shut, then led me back into the archive room without a word. Once we were inside, she turned to face me. What did you see? Prints. Inside. Circling the bed this time, she pressed a hand to her mouth, turned away for a second, then sat down at the small reading desk. They come closer each time, she said. At first they're cautious, curious maybe. But once they've entered, there's no way to uninvite them. The house is theirs too. I leaned on the edge of the desk. You said your brother disappeared, Caleb, right? She nodded. You never told me how. Claire stared at the tabletop. I thought she wasn't going to answer. It was the first snow of the season. We were eating dinner, just the two of us. My mom was late coming home from work. I remember we were joking about something stupid. I don't even remember what, but he was laughing. Then the lights flickered. She paused. There was a knock on the door, a soft one, like someone didn't want to be heard. I stayed quiet, let her keep going. I started to get up, but Caleb beat me to it. I told him not to open it. I remember yelling, but he just smiled and said, "It's probably Mom." Claire's voice dropped. He opened the door and said, "There's nobody here." I felt my throat tighten. Then he stepped outside. He didn't even put shoes on. What? I asked. He just walked out barefoot, into the snow. I ran after him, but he was gone. Gone? No footprints, no sound, just gone. She looked up at me then, her eyes glassy. The snow was untouched, like he'd never been there. A long silence settled between us, broken only by the hum of the overhead light. My mom didn't believe me at first. She tore the woods apart looking for him. But eventually, she stopped talking about it altogether. A year later, the first snow came again. I didn't have to ask what happened. She never made it home from work, Claire said. They found her car parked just outside the grocery store, still warm, door open, but no prints. They took her too. She nodded. I think, her voice cracked, I think when you let them in once, they never stop coming back. My hands had gone cold despite the warmth of the room. I swallowed hard. What are they? I asked. She didn't answer. I left the library that night more shaken than before. Claire didn't offer to walk me home, and I didn't ask. I think we both knew the snow was watching now, following. When I stepped outside, I paused on the stoop. The snow on the sidewalk was untouched, no prints, no sign of anyone, but I didn't trust it anymore. I walked back quickly, coat pulled tight, head down. The streets were quiet, no cars, no people, not even lights in windows, like the whole town had gone still the second darkness fell. The moment I stepped into the house, I knew something had changed. The air was heavier. The cold wasn't just outside, it had bled through the walls. I lit the fire immediately, then turned on every light I could find. I even dragged a mattress into the living room to sleep next to the hearth, but it didn't help. The walls creaked more now. Not constantly, just once in a while. Long, slow creaks like weight shifting above me, or below. I didn't sleep. The next morning I checked the bedroom again. There were no fresh prints, but the wet patches from the night before hadn't dried. They looked darker now, soaked into the grain, permanent. I called Claire again. "I want to leave," I said. There was a pause. "You can't," she said. "Not after the first snow. I haven't been here that long. What if I just go? You won't make it past the ridge. No one does. You said people disappear one by one, right? What if I just don't let it happen?" "It's not about letting it," she whispered. "It's about being seen." That word again, seen. It crawled down my spine. "I didn't invite anything in." "You did," she said. "The moment you looked out at the first flake and wondered what it meant, you saw it, and it saw you." I hung up. There was a part of me, maybe the last sane part, that wanted to run, to pack a bag and sprint into the woods, down the road, anywhere but here. But I didn't. Whether I believed Claire or not, some part of me was rooted now, caught in whatever net the snow had cast. That night, I kept the fire roaring, left salt by the doors, turned every light on, slept with an iron poker in one hand and a flashlight in the other. At 2:37 a.m., I heard something moving under the floorboards. Not pipes, not creaks, movement, weight, shifting and dragging, slow, deliberate. I stood in the center of the living room, holding the flashlight like a weapon, and waited. The sound moved to the far end of the house beneath the kitchen. Then silence. I waited there until the sun rose. When I checked the basement door, the lock was still bolted, but there was dirt on the floor. Just a little, like something had pushed through the seams in the wood and left a fine line of dark soil curling toward the hallway. I vacuumed it up. Then I checked the bedroom. 3 footprints. This time, not around the bed, just one next to it, one facing the closet, and one directly in front of the mirror above the dresser. I smashed the mirror with the iron poker and threw the pieces into the snow outside. I wasn't taking chances. I tried to call Claire again, straight to voicemail. By the time night fell, I had moved every piece of furniture I could in front of the bedroom door. I didn't want to go back in there. The only place I felt safe now was by the fire, with my back to the wall and my eyes on every window. I didn't sleep that night either, but I dreamed I did. And when I woke up, the footprints were back, inside. But this time, they didn't circle. They led from the front door, straight to the center of the living room, right to where I had been, sleeping, then stopped. No prints leading out, no sign of intrusion, just presence. And the smell, wet bark and frost-bitten moss, stronger than ever. I opened every window and let the cold in, just to chase the scent away, but it didn't work. The air felt claimed. The snow outside had started to pile against the windows now, thicker, hungrier, like it wanted in. I started keeping every light on, even during the day. It didn't help much. The room still felt dim. The corners still looked stretched, like the house itself had expanded during the night and never fully returned to shape. The walls seemed thinner than they should have been, the floor colder than it had any right to be. The prints kept fading on their own. By morning they were always gone, but not erased, just absorbed, like the house had taken them in, or worse, like it had always belonged to whatever left them behind. It started with the little things. A spoon moved an inch to the left. My boots weren't where I'd left them. I'd catch the bathroom door slowly creaking open when I knew I'd shut it. Then there were the floorboard creaks at night. At first, they were brief, 1 or 2 pops, just the old wood settling. But one night, around 3 a.m., I heard 5 slow, deliberate steps across the living room. Then silence. I didn't move. I just lay in my makeshift bed next to the fire, heart stuttering in my chest, barely breathing. The lights didn't flicker, but the room felt darker anyway, denser, like something stood just behind the air watching. I turned my head, no one there, but the earthy smell was back, thick and unmistakable. Wet bark, cold moss, the scent you find deep in a forest where things rot in the silence. I waited. I don't know how long. Time felt warped when it was around. That was the worst part. Never hearing it come, never seeing it, just knowing. Eventually the creaks returned, but this time they moved away, back toward the bedroom. I didn't follow. The next morning, the kitchen chair I always kept beneath the front doorknob was lying on its side across the room. The nails I'd hammered into the frame bent. I checked the latch. It was still locked. I stood in that doorway for 10 minutes, just trying to convince myself I'd misremembered where I left the chair. But I hadn't. It had been moved. The walls were quieter that day, but not because the house was empty. It was the kind of quiet that makes your skin itch. Suppressed, held in, like something was waiting for nightfall. I didn't go into town. I didn't talk to Claire. I didn't eat. That night, I boarded the front door from the inside with plywood and nails. Every slam of the hammer sounded too loud, too final, but I kept going. Then I did the same to the back. I placed salt across every windowsill, every threshold, iron tools in every room, poker by the couch, hatchet beside the bed, nails in a jar on the kitchen counter. When I finally sat down, I was shaking. The fire danced bright, but I didn't feel the heat. The boards above me creaked, once, then again, slower, pacing. I stood and stared at the ceiling, holding the poker like it was a weapon. I wanted to scream, to demand that whatever it was just show itself and get it over with. But I stayed still. It's never a good idea to invite something by name, even with silence. The ceiling above the hallway let out a long groaning shift, and something slid against the floorboards. I moved toward the attic. There was no hatch, not a drop down or a door, just a square panel nailed flush into the ceiling above the hallway linen closet. I hadn't tried to open it before. Now I couldn't stop staring at it. The attic wasn't listed in the rental. I'd assumed it was sealed, or maybe just insulation up there. But that sound, it had been moving. I grabbed the stepladder from the kitchen, carried it slowly to the hall, and climbed it with stiff legs. From this close, I could see scratches around the edges of the panel, deep ones, like someone had tried to open it from inside. I reached up and pushed gently. The panel shifted with a soft pop of dust. It was never nailed shut, just waited. The air that spilled out smelled wrong, heavy with rot and cold metal. I could barely see a foot into the space, just darkness and the hint of splintered beams. Then I saw it, a small mark on the inside of the panel, scratched into the wood, LAR, just those 3 letters. I closed it fast. The floor above me creaked again, but this time it wasn't the attic. It was the hallway, behind me. I spun around, nearly slipping off the ladder. The hallway was empty, but the smell, that forest rot, that damp mold and earth, was stronger now. I backed down and moved back to the living room, shaking. I didn't sleep. I didn't even sit down. And somewhere between 4 and 5 a.m., I heard the faintest sound of something shifting beneath the floor again, like soil turning. I thought about the basement. I hadn't checked it since the snow started. I'd locked it, but I hadn't gone down. That morning, I forced myself to open the door. The steps creaked as I descended, flashlight in one hand, fire poker in the other. The air was wet and stale, but not freezing, the kind of stillness that made your ears ring. There were crates and boxes stacked near the walls, all covered in dust, old furniture, mason jars. Nothing unusual at first, until I saw the boards. In the far left corner, part of the floor had been pulled up. Carefully, nails removed and set aside. A square maybe 3 feet wide had been lifted, and beneath it packed soil, but not just soil, etchings. Faint, almost erased, but they were there. Symbols carved into the earth itself, circles, arrows. a spiraling shape that made my stomach twist just looking at it. One word scratched into a wooden beam directly above it. Larson. I stepped back too fast and hit my head on the rafter. When I looked again, I thought I saw something dark in the soil, something wet, but I didn't get closer. I ran up the stairs, slammed the door, and nailed it shut. By the time I called Claire, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. She answered on the third try, her voice hoarse. I heard them too, she whispered. I found something in the basement. She didn't speak for a long moment. You found the mark? Yes. They used to bury offerings there, before the town outlawed it. What kind of offerings? She hesitated. Things that might distract them, fool them, make them think someone else lived in the house. But it never worked for long. The line went quiet again. Then she said, I'm coming over. It was snowing again when she arrived, heavier now. I let her in through the side door and locked it behind us, double-checking the salt lines and plywood. She moved through the house like she already knew it, like she remembered where the weak spots were. When I showed her the basement door, she stared at it like it was a grave. We're in the cycle now, she said quietly. Once they've started walking the house, there's no resetting it. You just have to survive until spring. I wanted to scream. How do I survive something I can't see? I can't fight footprints. She turned to me, and for the first time since I'd met her, she looked truly afraid. You don't fight them, she said. You wait. You hold your breath and wait for the snow to pass. But if they choose you, Jack, they don't stop. A floorboard creaked above us. She froze, then turned her head slowly toward the ceiling. They're listening, she whispered. We didn't sleep that night. We sat by the fire, iron tools beside us, and listened as something paced the attic, shifted under the floor, and lingered just outside every window. We didn't speak while the pacing continued. There was something about the rhythm, slow, patient, that made it worse than if it had charged at the walls. It was the sound of something that wasn't in a hurry, that had nowhere else to be. Claire sat cross-legged on the rug near the fire, her eyes tracking the ceiling like she could see through it. I'd never seen her look that small before, not even when she talked about Caleb. It stopped eventually. The steps, the shifting, just faded out like a song on a dying battery. But neither of us moved. It won't be long now, she finally said, voice like paper. Second set always means they're close. Second set? Claire looked at me like I should have known already. When someone's been marked, there's always more than one visit. The first one is a warning. The second, she hesitated. The second is a rehearsal. My stomach twisted. For what? For the night they take you. I felt a chill before I noticed the fire was almost out. I stood, added logs with hands that barely listened to me, then reached for the iron poker out of habit. I heard her take a breath, then say quietly, It's going to be you. The air shifted. I turned slowly. You've seen the prints. You've been followed. They've been inside more than once. Why not you? I asked. It came out harsher than I meant. You're part of this too. You lived in the Larson house. You brought me into all of this. She nodded, eyes cast down. They took from my family already. I was too young. I think they needed me to remember. I didn't understand what that meant, not fully, but I didn't ask. I didn't want to. She stayed through the rest of the night. We took turns dozing in the living room, always with one of us awake, listening. The house groaned like it was straining under weight that never fully lifted. When dawn finally arrived, the windows were nearly frosted shut. I had to press my hand against the glass to melt a clear patch. Snow had drifted halfway up the porch, and there they were, new prints. I unlocked the door and stepped outside before Claire could stop me. The air was bitter, but still soundless. The prints didn't lead from the trees this time. They came from around the side of the house, no clear origin, and stopped directly in front of the boarded-up front door. Then started again. Inside. I followed them back in. They curved through the hall, past the firewood bin and down the bedroom corridor. My mouth went dry. I opened the bedroom door and nearly dropped the poker. The footprints were there, plain as day, not just circling the bed this time. They weaved across the floor in a tight, deliberate path. At the foot of the bed, they turned, walked in a perfect arc to the nightstand, then past the closet, then back to the bed, and stopped right next to the pillow, my pillow. No prints going out. Claire stood behind me, arms folded tight. "They've chosen," she said, voice brittle. "You need to be ready." "For what?" "I can't leave, you said that. What's left to do? Just wait until I vanish in my sleep." "There's a pattern," she said, "an order. You might still have time." "Time for what?" She didn't answer, just turned and walked toward the hallway. "I'm going to the library. I'll check the old ritual records again. Meet me there before nightfall." I wanted to ask her to stay, but some part of me knew she wouldn't. After she left, I sat on the bed staring at the prints until they began to fade, the edges softening as the floor slowly reclaimed them. I traced one with my fingertip. The wood was dry, cold. I don't remember falling asleep, but I must have, because I woke to a knock. Soft, careful, one single knock. Not at the front door, which was still boarded up. Not the back. The window. I stared at it, breath caught in my chest. The knock came again. Same tone, same weight. I stepped closer. The curtains were closed. My hand trembled as I reached out, but I didn't open them. Instead, I backed away and picked up the poker again. The knock didn't come a third time, but something scraped down the glass. Just once, like a fingernail, or something pretending to be one. I waited until the light returned. Then I went to the library. Claire was already in the archive room, sleeves rolled up, eyes red. She didn't greet me, just slid an old leather-bound ledger across the table. "The town used to keep track," she said, "who disappeared, when, what the signs were. They stopped after 85. Too many questions." I flipped through it. Each name had a short paragraph beside it. Eleanor Cribbins, first snow, footprints across kitchen, vanished overnight. Matthew Harrow, basement disturbance, knock on second floor. Found only shoes at threshold. Caleb Larson, door opened, walked into snow, no prints left. There were dozens, then my hand froze. There, scribbled in slanted handwriting near the bottom of a 2007 entry. Once the second set appears, the marked "must not sleep alone." Alone is how they're taken. I looked up. Claire stared at the ledger like it might bite her. "That's why you stayed," I said. She nodded. "But I can't stay again tonight." "Why not?" She didn't answer. The snow was heavier on the walk home. Flakes the size of dimes fell straight down in slow motion, like they weren't really falling, just lowering. Every tree, every post, every corner was buried in white. Even the street signs looked hunched. I made it back just before the sun dipped behind the ridge. The silence in the house was immediate. I nailed the doors again, refreshed the salt lines, checked the attic and basement seals twice. Then I moved the mattress back into the living room, closer to the fire. Iron poker beside me, flashlight under the blanket. A small hand mirror across the room turned face down. I didn't plan on sleeping, but sometime after midnight I closed my eyes and opened them to silence. The fire was low. The salt line near the back door, disturbed, not broken, not smudged, just pressed, like something heavy had stepped just up to the line and no farther. I stared at it until sunrise. Then, finally, I slept. When I woke, the footprints were back, inside, but not fresh. Older, lingered, still damp around the edges, circling the couch, stopping just behind where my head had been, and still, no prints leaving. The prints never faded this time. Usually, they would begin to soften by morning, blur around the edges, and then vanish altogether by mid-afternoon. Not now. These stayed, damp and dark, each one perfectly defined, holding its shape even as the fire warmed the room. I didn't step near them. I moved around the living room like I was sharing it with someone else, someone I couldn't see but could still offend if I crossed the wrong line. That day, I stopped pretending anything could be fixed. I unplugged the landline from the wall, stopped trying to call Claire, stopped writing notes. I don't even remember what I ate, if I ate. I was conserving energy the way people do in caves, breathing less, thinking less, just enough to get to the next moment. The sound started again that night, the pacing, above me, except it wasn't above the living room anymore. It had moved down the hallway, toward the bedroom, the attic hatch. The boards up there should have groaned with weight, but they didn't. They pulsed. That's the only way I can describe it, like the wood was breathing, like the space above the ceiling had taken something in and was holding its breath. I stood at the end of the hall, staring up at the panel in the ceiling, flashlight in one hand, poker in the other. I didn't want to go up there. Every instinct I had screamed against it. But something had shifted, and I couldn't stand not knowing anymore. I dragged the ladder out again and climbed slowly. The flashlight beam cut through dust like underwater light. I pushed the panel open. This time, it moved too easily, like something had already pushed it from the other side. The air that poured down wasn't just cold, it was moist and earthy. The smell hit me like a wave. Moss, rot, cold bark, wet cloth, the scent of something long buried but still moving. I lifted myself into the attic. The beam of the flashlight caught the edges of the old rafters, thick with spider webs and long-forgotten insulation. At first glance, it looked empty, but the moment I moved the light, something glittered back at me from the far corner. Glass. I stepped forward, ducking under the low beams, careful not to breathe too deep. The object was half buried, in loose dirt, pushed up between the floor joists, like the house had coughed it up from below. I knelt down and brushed away just enough debris to see what it was. A jar. Not a mason jar, not a food container. This one was old, hand-blown glass, thick and cloudy with age. Inside, packed in a kind of blackened fabric, was a child's shoe. I nearly dropped it. Then I saw the carving scratched into the beam above it. Caleb. I staggered back, slipped on the loose boards and hit the rafter behind me. The jar tumbled from my hands and rolled. I scrambled after it. Before I could reach it, the attic floor beneath me let out a deep, splitting crack. Then I was falling. I hit the floor below hard, back slamming into boards, elbows cracking against plaster. Something wet hit my neck. I rolled onto my side, gasping. The shoe had landed beside me, but the jar had shattered. And in the wet black cloth surrounding it was something else, a tooth, small, human. I left it where it was and crawled back down the hallway. The house was quiet again, the air stale and heavy. When I opened my eyes again, it was morning. I'd passed out beside the fire. There were prints around me again, new ones. But these were different. They didn't just circle or stop beside the bed. They meandered, if that's the word for it, uncertain, wandering, as though whatever made them had begun searching. I followed them to the hallway. They led to the basement door. I hadn't opened it since sealing it off, but now the nails I'd hammered in were warped, some pushed out of place, as though the pressure had come from inside. The handle turned under my fingers. I pulled the door open and stood staring into the dark. The air smelled even worse than the attic. Richer, fungal. The smell of deep, wet earth and decaying things left too long in shadow. I descended slowly, one creaking step at a time. The basement floor was covered in soft, packed dirt. Damp footprints crossed it, deeper than before, still bare, still human-shaped. They led to the far corner, to the square I'd found days earlier where the boards had been removed. Now, the pit was wider, 3 feet across, maybe 5 deep. Inside, etched along the earthen walls, were more symbols, not just spirals and arrows, shapes that resembled eyes, open mouths, thin limbs, and words, faint but legible. Do not bury the marked. The earth does not keep them. I didn't go closer. I didn't want to see what the dirt might be hiding this time. I backed out and closed the door, hammered the frame shut again. The next night, Claire came. I didn't hear her knock. Not at first. The snow had thickened into drifts as high as my waist, and the wind had returned. But then I heard her voice, muffled but distinct, calling my name. I opened the side window just a crack. She was out there, coat dusted with snow, eyes wide and red-rimmed. "They're coming sooner than expected," she said. "You don't have much time." I let her in. She didn't speak for a while, just stood in the center of the room, arms folded like she was trying to hold herself together. Then she said, "I've been looking into the crawl spaces in town records. There were more than just one. The older homes all had them, places where things were buried or hidden." "I found the jar," I said, "and something else." She didn't ask what. Instead, she said, "They're getting impatient." That night, she stayed again, but the pacing didn't return. No sound above or below, no new prints. The house was too still, the kind of silence that presses against your ears until you start hearing things anyway. Around 3 a.m., Claire stood. "They're not walking tonight because they're watching." She moved toward the window, stopped short. I followed her gaze. Across the snow-covered yard just beyond the trees, something was standing, a shape, human-sized, still, not moving. We stared at it for what felt like hours, but it never stepped forward. It didn't need to. It had already been inside. We didn't speak while it stood there. Not for minutes, not even a breath. The thing never moved, not a shift of weight, not the twitch of a limb. The figure's edges blurred slightly in the snowfall, like the snow refused to land on it. I blinked once, and it was gone. No sound, no movement, just gone. Claire didn't seem surprised. She lowered the curtain and backed away from the window like she'd seen it before, too many times. She sat down near the fire, her shoulders hunched forward like something was pressing on her spine. "It stood there for my brother too," she said softly. "He thought it was a man in a coat, just watching." He waved. I still remember how casual it was, just a kid waving to a stranger. That was the day before he disappeared. "You said they only take one person a year." That's what people say, but no one ever really knew the rules. That's just what the town tells itself to sleep. I stared at the empty space where the figure had been, the trees behind it still gently swaying in the windless night. The snowfall was light now, but steady, falling in a way that felt planned. "How many have they taken?" I asked. Claire looked up at me. "We don't know. There are records, sort of, in the old church basement, but no one goes down there anymore. I want to see them." She didn't move. "I need to know what happened. You said the town tried something. What did they do?" Claire stayed quiet for a long time. Then she stood, brushed the salt from her jeans, and said, "Get your coat." The old church sat at the edge of town, a sagging stone building with stained glass windows that had long since faded into gray. It had been boarded up for years. The door gave way under her boot with a heavy crack, and the inside smelled like mold and old pine pews. Everything echoed. We walked past rows of crumbling benches toward a side door behind the pulpit. Claire pulled it open with some effort, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling down into damp blackness. The basement was worse than I expected. Part crawl space, part archive, part dumping ground for rusted tools and splintered icons. She led me through a narrow passage flanked by broken filing cabinets, and finally stopped in front of an old steel cabinet chained shut. Claire fished a key from her jacket and unlocked it. Inside were old boxes, file folders stained by decades of water damage, and what looked like the remains of a priest's journal. She handed it to me. The binding cracked when I opened it. The handwriting was neat, methodical. March 3rd, 1973. Snow began late. One child gone already. No signs again. Same as the last 3 years. March 5th. Have spoken with elders. Town will not speak it aloud, but the pattern is clear. Too many gone. March 7th. I found the passage in Father Dunholm's texts. Sealing right. Earth and flame, ash and name. Must act before the first white reaches ground next year. March 14th. Begun preparations. Circle marked in the hollow. Wood gathered. Soil must be fresh. We must give something to protect the town. The next entry was written in a rushed hand. December 2nd. We waited too long. The flake touched soil this morning. Seal incomplete. Hollow too shallow. They came early. Then scrawled at the bottom in shaky ink. We are marked now. I flipped the page. There was no next page. I looked at Claire. What happened? No one knows for sure. That winter, 32 people vanished in a whiteout, just gone. Some say they tried to burn the ground to seal it with fire and salt and names written in blood, but it didn't work. Some think it made it worse. And they stopped trying. Claire nodded. After that, they just buried it, locked the church, burned the books they could, but not everything. The priest, what happened to him? Disappeared. His robes were found folded at the town square, covered in soot. No prints around them. I didn't know what to say. The pages in my hand felt hot, like the paper itself remembered what it had failed to stop. They were trying to give it something, I said. Claire sat on an overturned pew, arms wrapped around herself. That's what it always was, a kind of offering. If one goes, the rest stay. And you think they tried to cheat it? I think they tried to trap it, or at least keep it from noticing the town. But when you mess with a rule you don't understand, it notices more. She nodded. We took the journal and a few of the files. Back at the house, I laid everything out on the floor like puzzle pieces, every name, every year. The same markers kept showing up, prints in the snow, one knock, movement in the attic, the smell of wet earth. Every single time, one person vanished. And if someone left town after the first snow, they were gone too. No body, no prints. I saw it, I whispered, running my finger across one yellowed record. I saw the first flake. Claire sat silently across from me, face pale. Jack, tell me what to do. If there's any way out, I need to know now. I don't think there is any more. Not since you were marked. But, she trailed off, eyes distant. What? There's a mention. Here, she said, pulling an index card from one of the folders. It's not much, just a line. She read it aloud. Those who sleep on soil cannot be taken unless they carry the town with them. What does that mean? I don't know. It might be metaphor. Or maybe literal. I stood. The pit in the basement. Claire looked up slowly. You think it's for that? They carved symbols into the walls. It wasn't for storage. They buried something there. I think they were trying to root themselves into the earth. She hesitated. If you go down there, you're giving them another opening. I think they've already taken it. I didn't sleep that night. Neither did Claire. We sat in silence, listening to the wind scrape against the walls like claws on stone. At 2:14 a.m., we heard the steps again, but this time not in the attic. It came from inside the walls. The sound in the walls didn't fade with the sunrise. It just stopped, abruptly, like someone pausing mid-sentence. Claire and I sat frozen in place, backs pressed to the same patch of wall like we could keep it from breathing if we held still long enough. When it went quiet, neither of us moved for a long time. Eventually she stood and whispered, "It's almost done." I didn't ask what done meant. The look in her eyes told me not to. She didn't stay long. Said she needed to check something back at the library, but I think she just wanted distance. We were both unraveling, but in different ways. When the door shut behind her, I was alone again, and the house seemed to know it. That day, I kept the fire going with every piece of wood I had left. Even when it got too warm, I didn't let it die. I didn't eat. I didn't check the windows. I didn't want to see if the figure had returned. I laid down on the living room floor sometime after sunset, wrapped in every blanket I could find, salt poured around me in a crude ring. I held the poker tight and kept the flashlight on, even when the batteries began to fade and the beam turned yellow. I must have drifted off, because I woke to music. Soft, mechanical, a wind-up melody coming from just down the hall. At first, I thought I was imagining it, my mind producing sound just to fill the silence. But no, it was real. I could hear the notes repeating, simple, tinny, childlike, a lullaby I didn't recognize. It was coming from the bedroom. I stood. My legs were slow to obey, stiff from the cold and the tension that never left my body. The poker trembled in my hand as I moved toward the door. The music stopped the moment I touched the knob. I opened the door slowly. The room was dark. I hadn't turned on the light in there for days. The air was colder than the rest of the house, and the smell, wet soil and bark, was suffocating. The wind-up toy sat in the center of the bed, a little red clown with a cracked face and one broken eye. I didn't own it. I don't know where it came from. The mattress around it was soaked, not water, not snow, just soaked, like something had bled into the fabric through the ceiling. I stepped back into the hall, heart pounding, and shut the door. There was a piece of paper on the floor behind me, folded, crisp, placed with care. I knelt and picked it up with shaking fingers. Inside, written in careful block letters, "You've been chosen. You saw the first flake. No signature, no explanation, just confirmation." I ran, not far, not out the door. I still remembered Claire's warnings about leaving after the snow. But I ran to the basement and ripped the nails from the door with the claw end of the poker. I stumbled down the stairs and threw open the pit's wooden cover. The carvings were still there. The soil hadn't changed. But now, there were footprints in the dirt. 2 sets, one larger, one smaller, deep and fresh. Not mine. I backed out of the basement, slammed the door, and didn't stop hammering it shut until I bent every nail I had. When I turned, the kitchen window was fogged from the inside. A single palm print had appeared in the center of the glass. I didn't sleep. I didn't sit. I just waited. And when the scream came, I didn't move at all. It tore through the wall like it was right beside me. A raw, choked scream full of panic and fury and something worse. Recognition. Claire. I bolted upright and ran to the front of the house, trying to follow the sound. It echoed again somewhere behind the walls, muffled like she was buried beneath them. I shouted her name, no answer, just silence. Then, for the first time in days, I heard the wind. Not a breeze, a full gale, roaring across the ridge, rattling the boards, moaning through cracks in the foundation. The sound of a storm that didn't want to be ignored. I pressed my hand against the window. The snow outside was falling in sheets now, sideways, fast. It looked like white noise, like static. The porch was buried. The trees had vanished. Everything was white, a full whiteout. I turned and saw that the footprints had returned, new ones. This time they weren't by the bed. They weren't circling. They were behind me, right behind the chair where I'd been sitting, standing still, facing me. I didn't look up. I didn't turn. I couldn't. I backed slowly into the kitchen, watching the hallway with my peripheral vision, waiting for movement. Nothing. But I could feel it, the pressure, like being underwater. Then I heard something else, a soft breath, from the hallway, just one. I ran to the library the next morning, as soon as the wind died. I don't even remember unlocking the door, just that the lights were already on when I got there. But the building was empty. Her bag was on the desk, her notebook open, but no Claire. I searched every room, upstairs, downstairs, archive closet, nothing. And when I came back to the desk, the note she'd once written me had been unfolded and placed neatly on top of the journal, the one that said, "Don't answer the door if the snow is new." I didn't cry. I couldn't. By the time I got back to the house, everything felt different, not louder, not more active, but final, settled. I turned the doorknob and stepped inside like I was entering a tomb. The prints were waiting. This time they didn't walk or turn or circle. They stood, just one pair, in the center of the living room, facing me. They hadn't moved since I left. I didn't sleep the night after Claire was taken. I didn't even sit. I just stood in the living room, watching the pair of footprints in front of the chair, still damp where they met the warped floorboards. My breath fogged in the air. The fire had long gone out, but I couldn't bring myself to build it back up. Every piece of wood I'd tossed in felt like a countdown. They were waiting. I knew that now. Not to be seen, not to be welcomed, just to be acknowledged. I moved through the house like I didn't own it anymore, like I was squatting in something old and patient. I checked the attic, even though I knew there was no point. I checked the basement too. Sealed, quiet, the dirt pit undisturbed except for those prints that had appeared and never left. I boarded every window, hammered them shut, layered the door with salt and ash and firewood stacked so high I could barely open it if I needed to. And then I waited. They came after midnight. The lights didn't flicker, but they felt dimmer. The color drained from the walls. The smell of damp forest floor filled the house again, heavier than before, like mold growing in my lungs. Then came the silence, heavier than any sound I'd heard before. The kind that pushes into your ears, presses behind your eyes, makes your blood slow. I stood in the middle of the room with a poker in one hand, a jar of dirt in the other, and every muscle in my body clenched so tight I thought my bones would splinter. Then they arrived, the footprints, one after the other, soft but certain. I didn't hear the steps, only felt them, through the floor, through the air, like a vibration crawling across the planks. I watched them appear, from nothing. The first print sank into the floor without fanfare, then the second, heel to toe, no person, no figure, just the prints as if made by an invisible weight. They advanced, across the living room, past the fireplace, toward me. I backed against the wall and held the poker up like it would matter. But I already knew it wouldn't. The prints kept coming until they stopped 2 feet in front of me, and held. Nothing moved, but I felt it there, close, watching, expectant. The pressure built until I thought my ribs would crack from the inside. The silence was unbearable, like something enormous was breathing just outside human hearing. I didn't speak, but I remembered. The journal entry in the library archive, the priest's writing. They do not take what belongs to the earth, and the line Claire found later. Mark yourself with the soil. I dropped the poker. I grabbed the fireplace shovel and scooped up the cold ash, dumping it onto the floor. I cracked the jar of soil I dug from the basement pit and poured it over the ash, mixing the two together with shaking hands. Then I knelt and rubbed it across my skin. Neck, arms, chest, face, everywhere I could reach. The ash was gritty and smelled of rot. The dirt was cold and sticky, clinging to every crevice. It felt like painting myself with death. But as soon as the last smear touched my forehead, the pressure in the room changed. Not gone, just confused. The footprints shifted one step back, then still. I took a breath and whispered the words again just to be sure. They do not take what belongs to the earth. They do not take what belongs to the earth. And then I said it louder, over and over, until I was shouting it through clenched teeth. The air pulsed once, then again, and then. Nothing. The weight lifted. The smell faded, and the footprints retreated. One by one they stepped backward toward the fireplace. The last one paused by the hearth, then vanished completely. The house was silent. No groaning wood, no shifting above, no breath behind the walls. I waited to be sure it wasn't a trick. Then, as dawn broke behind the boarded windows, I peeled back one slat and looked outside. Snow still blanketed everything, thick, unbroken. But then I saw it, a second set of footprints, heading away from the house, perfectly formed, evenly spaced. They trailed down the porch steps, across the yard, into the woods, the first set I'd ever seen that went outward. I didn't follow. I waited until spring. The snow melted slowly that year, like it didn't want to leave. But eventually, the trees showed their branches again, and the wind smelled like pine instead of frozen dirt. I unboarded the windows, let the light in, burned what was left of the fireplace ash and dumped the soil back into the crawl space. Claire didn't return. I checked every day, walked to the library, knocked at her apartment. Her place was locked, empty, her car untouched, her bag still on the library desk. No one else in town mentioned her. No missing posters. No questions. Just silence, as if she'd never existed. But I knew better. They had taken her. She warned me, and they took her, and she wasn't coming back. When the roads opened in early April, I packed a single bag and left Dulwich before the last of the snow could finish melting. I didn't look back. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't even turn on the radio. I just drove until the pine trees thinned and the mountain disappeared behind me. I kept the soil under my fingernails. For weeks. I didn't wash it off. I slept in motels, sat in parking lots, watched the skies for clouds every time I saw frost on a windshield. I clenched my jaw until it cracked. I've lived in 4 different towns since then. Never stay more than a year. Never anywhere with real winters. I keep a bag of dirt and a jar of ash under my bed just in case. I never saw the first flake again. But I still don't sleep when it snows.